if you're not awake, you're not going to get your read. Oh, there he is.
Hey, John. He's muted.
Unmute yourself. Hello.
There he is.
Hey, good morning. Hey,
Hi.
people. How are you?
How are you? Did you get any sleep?
I did. I got 5 hours sleep, and I'm just making sure all these other alarms, you know how it is. You set like 17 alarms just to make sure.
Oh,
And then
okay.
one.
Going.
And do you have to do any teaching today?
Sabbatical, baby.
What is that?
I'm on sabbatical, baby.
Oh, okay. No excuse then.
No excuses.
Yeah.
And it's recess week also.
Okay, your audio is a little strange. It's not, I mean, it's on, but it
Yep.
sounds kind of echoey. How does it sound to you, Chuck?
Oh, it sounds warbly, kind of warbly.
Yeah.
Okay, I put in this new camera that gives me a sharper image. But what if I
Plug it and just use the computer's
That's
stuff.
much better.
That is much better. Much
Okay, then this guy, another $40 down the drain. All right.
And actually, you're clearer. The video is clearer.
Yeah, and the picture doesn't seem any worse either. So, so let's see. It's 2:56 where I am, and the
No one is ever on time. So, well, Chuck
okay.
is on time because it's you. He wanted to say hi.
Chuck, it's 2:56 in the morning. Is that early for you or late? Or is it midday for you?
It's midday. John, I just want to say thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
You are a gentleman and a scholar, and you know, I'm just in your debt, buddy. So
Well,
thank you.
I'm just in your debt, so it's thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for thinking of me, Sharyn. Thank you for inviting me. It's fun.
You seem to be perfect. So, and remember, these are these are people who, for the most part, might not understand much about Buddhism, and
Okay.
and have no clue as to what's going on in the story. Maybe I have half a clue, so you're going to have to explain some of it or all of it.
For the story sticks, do you think?
Yeah.
I would
Well,
talk maybe.
and also
think about religion, you know, the impulses, but I don't know. It doesn't seem. Does it seem to you like a very Buddhist story?
you know, I wrote to him and told him that I chose the story because it seemed to me to be a story of impermanence. And he said something like, wow, you know, I hadn't thought of that, but that could be what it is.
Hello.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hello.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Chuck.
I'm John.
Hello, John. Nice to meet you.
Do you want us to call you John or JW? What do you want us to call you?
He's John.
John.
Your
Okay.
eminence has never really stuck, you know.
What is that?
John. My name is John.
I know
your eminence has never really stuck.
You should speak to your minions.
King has made a comeback, but that's just in England with one guy. Yeah. So you communicated with George about the story in this way. Hello.
Hi, Ava.
Hello. Morning.
Good morning.
Ava, I'm John.
Hello. Yes, I know that you will be in the placement of Mr. Saunders.
Well, there's some big shoes to fill there.
And he's also in Singapore.
Yeah.
Oh,
Are you there? There will be midnight.
It's 2:59 a.m.
Why aren't you at
Wow.
Raffles?
He's doing this for us.
yeah.
You should
Well,
be at
yeah.
raffles.
We're so grateful.
I like the food courts, the cheap food courts. I like value for money.
I
I've
bet.
been
You
here
don't
all
want
the
to throw
time.
peanuts around on the floor, huh? Peanut shells.
Raffles? Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been there for a while. Yeah, there's this one part where every writer who's ever stayed there, Chuck, have you ever, yeah, you guys, yeah, you should go to the Raffles Hotel and then get your book put in the case with Ernest Hemingway and
Wow, okay.
Joseph Conrad. And, you know, it was the go-through place for everybody who was coming through this part of town.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got a little book, a little case of books, right? Am I remembering right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go there for a tea, you know, it's $120 a person or something. So,
Really?
hello, Tamara.
Hi, Tamarah.
Hi, Tamara.
Good morning. I have a
I'm
million notes, so I'm ready whenever.
Oh, gosh. John, you got to watch out.
Watch out for her.
Excellent, excellent.
I love George Saunders, so this was very exciting, and I'm so grateful for John to be here. I
My
have
pleasure.
also been deep diving in your work, and I, the other night we have a writers group at the Rainier Club, and someone was mentioning what they wrote, and I was like, oh, you would love this author as well. So we're spreading your the joy of your authorship around the world as much as we can.
What do you
Right.
find relevant? I'm an academic hack. I write articles for people that never read them. What did you?
I'm afraid to say that from one academic hack to another, those are what sparks joy. So, and right now I am working on the history of the exclamation point in romantic poetry, and
Oh, yeah?
through the perspective of gender.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting. Yeah.
It is really
I-
interesting. Women don't
got-
use exclamation points.
You know, we've got
I
some
cut
people
back
in my
on them.
Except in
some people in my department who want to use,
I use it a lot in my email and the
email
text
we don't.
message.
Yeah, I started editing them out of my other work and
You're
adding
taking them
other
out.
things to. What is that, John?
You're taking them out.
Some of them out. Hi, Bob.
But
I see
Tamara, you're
that
finding
there.
the change over time, right?
I'm finding the change over.
Tamarah, John is also a poet. I want you to know that too. He's also a poet.
Oh, lovely. I did not know that. I didn't have time to look it up. And so that apparently is what I'm doing for the rest of the week.
Oh, you won't find anything. I've started, Sharyn told me about Duotrope, so I've been sending stuff out this month, but I've been writing for about a year. And let me see. These are the poems. One ream of typing paper. So I need to try to find, 80 pages out of that. But anyway, the exclamation point, that sounds really cool. I got obsessed with something in Chaucer about that was like, it was parentheticals in the
Oh,
Canterbury Tales, and they show up at odd times. And I don't know, I never went and wrote something about it, but there's a there. And it's something that, we have some students, they really like big data, like reading books through computers, distant reading, right? And I've always found that, like, how's that ever going to be better than a human? I mean, have you ever looked yourself up through Chat GPT? It says I wrote books that I never wrote.
oh,
I mean, it's just
Same thing
wrong.
happens to Chuck. Some
Yeah.
weird titles show up for him because of his name.
Yeah.
Mixes things up. But for something like tracking, punctuation and running it against gender, if you can find the right databases, I can really see that happening, because there's a sort of we can assume it's a sort of I don't know, not necessarily gendered assertion, but it's going to be related to that, right? Like
going to
the
be-
being emphatic.
right. It's
Yeah,
going to be the
let's
I know. Okay. Another time.
You want to
and
talk
you
about
might be
George
able
Saunders or something?
to, that guy, yeah.
That
British
George Saunders
stuff.
guy. Okay. I see we have a Robert and a Meredith. Hi, I'm John.
Hi, John.
John,
Hello.
you're introducing yourself, and that's
Hello.
okay. You might be able to tell that he has an American accent, and we both share Stamford, Connecticut. Uh,
Sometimes I think, people will see the hyphenated last name, and I just, when they can't spell it, I say, it's a village in England, and then they can spell it. But I've been in Singapore a long time. This is my 25-year service medal
oh,
from the government of Singapore. So I never
Wow,
got a medal before. I got a medal, man.
congratulations. That's
Yeah.
amazing. It's
Some of
impressive.
you out there.
and with disclosure, Chuck and I visited his class in Singapore, so we kind of know about his classes, and well, from 2 days anyway, for teaching and talking to them. They're lovely students, wonderful.
John is a very creative teacher, an expansive mind. So I think we are in for a treat.
Yes.
I,
And,
I,
and
I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I had Chuck and Sharyn do 4 events in one day. It just worked out that way. And Sharyn was like trying to grow a new leg after she twisted her ankle so bad in India. So by the end of it, I think
I
you
broke
guys,
a bone, actually.
by the dinner that night, I think it was traumatic for you guys, but it was lovely. Yeah.
It was. They were really good. It was good. I was reading from my novel, and I don't. Chuck, you read a story, I think.
Yeah. Sharyn, why don't you introduce John?
That's exactly what I was lining up for. Okay, Chuck, are you still an associate professor?
I'm an associate professor for life. I've said the wrong things to the right people.
Okay, all right. I understand that. But we won't go into it. Okay, anyway, John Whalen-Bridge is Associate Professor of English at the National University of Singapore. He's the author of Political Fiction and the American Self, co-editor with Gary Storhoff of Emergence of Buddhist American Literature and American Buddhism as a Way of Life, and editor of Norman Mailer's later fictions. With Tan Sor Hoon, he co-edited Democracy as Culture, Dewey and Pragmatism in a Globalizing World. He's published essays on American authors associated with Buddhism, Orientalism, literature, the Cold War, and pragmatism. He's completing a study of engaged Buddhism and countercultural writing in post-war America, focusing on Gary Snyder, Charles Johnson, and Maxine Hogg Kingston. John Whalen-Bridge.
Maybe George Saunders.
Can I add
And
one
George Saunders.
Maybe George.
Sharyn, can I add one thing?
Okay.
John is responsible for the creation of the Norman Mailer Society and also the Charles Johnson Society and the American Literature Association. They would not exist if this man had not gotten very energetic and conjured them into being. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Yes, and I went to one of those sessions. It was really very informative. Okay, John, now it's your turn to introduce George Saunders.
Okay. Can I ask first, have you guys, you've read the story Styx. Have you read other George Saunders?
10th of December.
Well, the other day, a member at the Rainier Club, as Tamarah mentioned, that the writers group, and she took out a book titled "A Swim in the Pond of Life" or the Pond of, yes, and about 4 writers. I think all of them are Russian. So 4 Russian writers,
Yes.
writing styles. Anthony Chekhov is one of them.
Yeah, and he's got, his 3 decades or so as a creative writing literature teacher at Syracuse, and he put that together and he focused it in that book, choosing 4 Russian writers. So that's a treat. If you want a quick treat, Google Stephen Colbert, George Saunders, and he's been on more than once, but on The Late Show, He went on to publicize his children's book, The Unstoppable Gappers of Fripp, which is kind of silly and well illustrated, but he's a charming guest. We don't get to see novelists on these TV shows very much, but it's just a fun little bit if you want to see it. He's primarily known as a short story writer. He had I don't know, I'm not sure exactly, 6 or 7 short story collections. And maybe his most characteristic kind of story is set in a dystopian theme park where the people are kind of forced to live the roles that they have to pretend to be. He's got several stories like that, which satirize maybe corporate culture. There's one where a couple of people have to pretend to be caveman and cavewoman, and they're not allowed to communicate in modern human English, but they get faxes from the boss in the back all the time. So there's a lot of this annoyance at the modern office and the shrinking of the mind that goes with that. Comically, you get this in TV shows like The Office, but it's often got a sort of a Vonnegut or Orwellian sort of spin with Saunders. He's written that kind of novella 4, 5, 6 times. And this story sticks is kind of an outlier because it's so short. So a nice thing to do is, if I'm going to be teaching is one novel, Lincoln in the Bardo, in which almost every character is dead. It's a kind of a bunch of ghosts. Lincoln in the Bardo. There's the Lincoln who's dead. It's not the assassinated Abraham Lincoln. It's the little son, Willie. And a bunch of these ghosts who don't really know they're dead. It's like Sixth Sense. They really know that the kids shouldn't hang around here. You're supposed to move on, right? Get past your problem. The problem for Willie is he thinks his dad has abandoned him. We did a play version of this. We did a reading version.
Does everyone know what Bardo is?
No.
Oh, Bardo in Buddhism. Bardo in Buddhism, it means space between.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Primarily the space between one life and another in that eschatology. You die and you float around a bit, and maybe your desires or afflictive emotions or whatever, at that point they can really pull you into your next life, but then you will go somewhere else. And George Saunders in Lincoln in the Bardo doesn't show where you might go next, but he does show people kind of reaching a kind of insight and popping out. A Bardo can also be any in between. You go to bed at night, that's the Bardo between one day and the next when you wake up again. There's a dream Bardo. I mean, these are like formal practices. Saunders and his wife, I think they've run some kind of Tibetan Buddhist center out of their house for like 10 years. His wife, Paula Saunders, also a novelist. I don't know too much about that. He didn't want to give interviews about it because I think people started speaking to him like he's the master, and he said, it's above my pay grade. He just won't talk about that stuff. So otherwise,
he was Nyingma.
Nyingma.
Yeah.
And somebody told me they knew who the teacher was, and I have it written down somewhere. But when he does his interviews and things, he'll talk about the necessary concepts. But it's tricky. We know, from Chuck's work, there's things you have to do if you want to bring Buddhist practices or Asian philosophical disciplines to the attention of the American audience and keep them interested. So it's kind of interesting in that way, what you have to do to maybe naturalize it. Chuck does this wonderfully in several of his books. 2 I'll mention real quick just about Chuck. Try to embarrass him like he embarrassed me by saying nice things. But what's the first Chuck book I would have read? Oxherding Tale, in which, Chuck, you correct me if I don't say this right, but my understanding is that Chuck read not just Frederick Douglass, but a lot of escaped slave narratives and wanted to recast this postmodern way as a voyage of liberation that wasn't just bodily outward liberation, you know, not being in shackles as a slave. There is that part, but there's also the inner liberation. I won't tell you whether or not the character achieves moksha. No spoiler alerts here. But that's one book. And another one with maybe a more familiar territory is Dreamer, about Martin Luther King Jr.'s latter days on the tour, when in a kind of magic realist way, this guy shows up at the door who's the exact double of King, Chaim Smith. Same birthday, looks exactly alike, and kind of a, you know, in terms of his class, he's not the solid middle class upbringing. He's not the son of Daddy King. He was, in Chuck's words, one of Chuck's character, Bishop, says, I think, he was just the kind of person the movement had been trying to keep out of the camera's eyes for years, the very embodiment of the blues. And I love that character, man. I don't know. Can I quote things Smith says? Is this
Okay, can we get back to Saunders?
You want to get back to Styx. So
Well, when you're talking about Chuck and Saunders, and actually our next author, Joanna Scott, they're the three MacArthur Fellows in the book. So just a little note, because we haven't said much about George Saunders' background.
George Saunders, I'll tell you, was an engineer.
Yes.
He wrote a story that reminded me a lot about certain things about Singapore, which is weird because most American writers don't remind me of Singapore. He had this bit, and so I found his email and I wrote to him, and he said, well, I was what kind of engineer is it? You know, you work on the drilling oiling rigs, and it's like 4 weeks on and 4 weeks off. And then he'd say we'd go to Singapore, and that was a different Singapore than the one I live in now. Everything's bright and shiny and new. Yeah. And this is more when they were building that. It's a new nation. So he was an engineer and, working on oil rigs, doing that kind of thing. And if you read some of his stories, you'll come across phrases like maw of capitalism. He describes himself as to the left of Gandhi. So critical, but, what do you do in your stories? How do you make it a good story? You don't just have propaganda with people. His early collections, Civil War Land in Decline, the story that gives the name to that collection is one of those dystopian theme park stories, and there's quite a few of those. He also became a teacher at Syracuse University. Around 2010, I think he had one of those Annus Mirabilis years, just started getting awards and things. And his collection, 10th of December, hit it really big. People started to notice. I wanted to get George as a visitor for the American Literature Association conference, but the guy who runs the show didn't really know who he was yet. He didn't really believe me. He wanted to get somebody else. So Lincoln and the Bardo came out, and the next year, George Saunders was the first American to win the Booker Prize. So that's for a novel, but it's written in dramatic dialogue, and it's a bit confusing at first. I think the idea is when we die and go into the Bardo, it's going to be a bit confusing at first. It's like you jump out of the airplane and the parachute hasn't opened yet, and you just hope things work out. So he's written all those books, and his latest collection is called Liberation Day. I believe that's his latest, Liberation Day. And that's short stories again. Yeah. And that one has some kind of weird sci-fi stories, or he's thinking about artificial intelligence and basically what the self is. So Styx is one that I might pop out at the very beginning of class when we're going to talk about this stuff, but it's one page. But it can be kind of a baffling page. Am I wrong? What do you guys think? First response is, did you enjoy Styx, or did you think
It was really rich and deep. I think it's one of the best things we've read so far. And it was so short, but it's packed.
Yeah, the word I used was packed. It's just there's so much in that 1 page or 1.5 page literary work. It's amazing how much he's packed in there.
But
What
also,
what would you if you were going to tell someone what the story was, what would you say?
It's
You know,
sad.
I come up to you and maybe you're holding a lyre and we're pastoral people taking care of the sheep. And I say, sing me a short story. And you think, well, I just read Styx, so I'll run that one by them. What's the story?
well, I think that when you ask what does the story appear to be, um, I think that it appears to be a story about a father, and it's from the perspective of one of the siblings. And I had my kids read it because they will always, kids are wonderful because they'll tell you exactly what you don't see. And so she said, well, the daughter, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, I actually didn't consider that. It might have been. Um, but I think that when you get into it, like the story reflects the father in such a interesting way because the story is just as miserly as the father. There are things that are not communicated. There are things that will never be communicated. Like when he sits there and blinks, what does that mean? Is he uncomfortable? Is he realizing it? Like, but also that doesn't matter because it is mandatory for the audience to reflect themselves. And so that's why this story feels so heavy, is because the audience is a mandatory character in it. And so we're being forced to interact with the scene and with this entire life.
Yeah.
So,
Did everybody notice that blinking? What is going on with the blinking?
Well, in a way, I thought that perhaps he hadn't really thought how unusual this was. His father dressing up the sticks for different holidays until his girlfriend comes, his date comes over, and she's saying, "What's up with your dad and the poles?" And he's like thinking about that and how do I respond? And that was what I
Yeah.
thought.
Sometimes a character is kind of our center or avatar in the game, and in this one, there's a lot of blinking or not communication or not understanding, but the author has to find ways, for the joke to get told.
I,
Yeah.
I think, oh, I'm sorry, Eva, do you want to go?
Oh,
No,
you go,
you go,
you
Stefan.
I was just gonna say, you mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned the Bardo, and it seems that there's a lack of connection or communication among the people completely, and that he only touches the sticks. He doesn't touch the family. And at the very end, he tries to sort of apologize with writing
Mhm.
love and the strings that he was doing and connect and making connections, but then it's gone and there's nothing.
Yeah. And whatever it is he wants to communicate, the sibling, the son or the daughter, whoever it is at the end that is sort of giving us presence in the story, they're not the ones that know it. We're supposed to pick up on it. We're supposed to see what that blinking is. I think you get that kind of blinking in Nabokov Lolita at some point, just somebody just can't quite get what's going on. And these facial tics are there to just say, to register the non-understanding. So it's kind of, George says in interviews that he sort of has to defend himself against charges of not being a very good realist by saying not everybody wants to be a very good realist. So these Civil War dystopian, these theme park stories, they're really not like everyday life. Some of these stories are really bizarre. Like Liberation Day is about writers who've been enslaved and put up on a wall, and then they entertain people as an allegory. You can see, okay, he's saying something about the writing industry and what it's become, but it's not realistic. So he says, no, no, no. Short story is like a black box, and you go in feeling one way, and you have to come out feeling another way. You know, something in you should shift as a result of that experience. And what goes on in the black box, maybe we don't even know all the time. But if Styx is an experience like that, would we relate it to real life situations? I mean, I think it depends on your background.
I certainly think so. I thought that what was really interesting was that when he dressed up the pole, it was in holidays, and I know that that seems easy to do. There's costumes in holidays, there's traditions in holidays, but with holidays, a holiday is a liminal space of the calendar, and so that's the time when you are allowed to do something different. And I thought that that was something very deliberate that George used in this, because he was allowing himself to do something different and to communicate in really an exuberant way with his family in the only way that he knew how. And so what I thought was interesting in the first paragraph was it was very traditional holidays. It was 4th of July, it was Thanksgiving, Santa. But after the blinking, after you clear your eyes, you have fresh eyes at everything, all of a sudden everything changed. And then it became this mess. And it was just, the Groundhog's Day was kind of messy. And then it became more elaborate. And I have to ask myself, was the first paragraph really just the innocence of childhood? And that's all he saw as a child. And then afterwards, he realized that it was actually more of an elaborate mess of liminality that his father was trying to exhibit. I think that I don't have a problem asking that question. Is their perspective reliable? And even in the end, everything is removed entirely as if it's forgotten when it's clearly not forgotten. And that just sticks with you. So I think that the liminality of the holidays is very significant.
Let's talk about holidays. Yeah, Stephanie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're talking about holidays from a human point of view, traditionally holidays are times families get together and there's connection and there's hugging and there's something between them. The only connection here is with the sticks, not with his children, not with his family. He's dragging them behind him as they go, or they're following behind him as he's doing his stick thing. But there's no interaction with people or anything. And if anything, it seems like they're not ignored perhaps, but neglected in this process of creating the art or whatever he's doing with the sticks.
Yeah, there are not, it's not the ideal Christmas story or satisfying relation. So the holidays are there, and it sort of provides us a measure of what isn't there. Yeah, Ava?
I think it's very spiritual. I think he is practicing his rituals of his religion. It's a meditating for him. And then also in that spiritual world of his, it's detached from the reality. But anyway, he picks holidays because it's more symbolic of it represents the most lonely moment in his life, and every holidays, and he did it. I don't know. When I read it, I thought it's a kind of practice of his spiritual rituals, and it's a world that he wants to find something for himself where he can relax or meditate or communicate. But in the reality, it doesn't work that way.
I think that's a good point to follow through on a little bit, because John, you brought this up before, how George Saunders brings in his Buddhism, into his stories. I remember reading, I can't remember which story it was, in 10th of December, that he put in other words the Heart Sutra. It was
Yeah.
like emptiness. The whole thing was, this doesn't exist, that doesn't exist. But he was putting it in terms, of course, that most people would understand. But to me, it was the Heart Sutra. In this one, I wrote to him and said I saw the concept of impermanence in this, and the concept and the idea of how, and he agreed, and how, and this I'm adding, I didn't bring this up to him, and how emotion is also empty, how we don't have, how emotion really doesn't exist. And that could be something that's going on in this story. What do you think about that?
I think that's a tricky area because you're supposed to feel something different when you go in and when you come out of the black box of the short story.
Yes.
So emotion is just part of the the basic material of the fictional experience, right? It's like you need bricks to make a building and you need emotions to make a story. But how we relate to emotions, that's very important. And perhaps it's a matter of the failure to relate to emotions, to be present for each other. That's the tragedy in this story, because in the story, it's not like the main characters get redeemed. It's pretty bleak in that way. The stuff just gets thrown away in the next spring cleaning. It's just garbage. But as Ava was saying, these are holidays, and Meredith Tamarah was saying that this is sort of a man's kind of organic individual stab at religion. Some people go to church for the coffee hour after the service, and I don't say that with a sneer.
Yes.
That is real community. You go every Sunday and you sit and you sing and you pray and you this and you that. And then there's the coffee hour. And it's, not being alone with your computer screen. And this story is a man reaching out, and what starts out almost like a kind of a joke, putting football helmets on the thing, but it's kind of like a crucifix,
It is.
right? Saunders, like Charles Johnson over there in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, is some Buddhist American writers are going to say, Buddhism good, Judaism, Christianity bad. Some are just like, no, I'm not going to do that. Jewish Buddhist writers, not going to, I'm not going to go in, point back at my tribe and say they were wrong. I'm not doing that. And African Americans, no, Jan Willis, Charles Johnson, not going to do that. So I believe George Saunders is in the same camp in that way. He wants to find the part of that tradition that is good. And the sticks, they're crossed this way and they be, there is, without it being Christianity, he's not trying to put on an infomercial, saying you should be religious in this way, but he's showing the impulse of this man, which is not understood by others. But we get to that part of the story where he says, forgive. That's the message, forgive. And how does the man wind up? What happens to the elderly fellow, the father?
Yeah, it dies.
Yeah.
How does he die? Is it a good death? I mean,
He died in
we
a
don't always
hall
get
with
to
the
choose.
radio on.
Died in the hall with the radio on.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I'm listening to too much MSNBC. I don't want to go that way. It's a
Very lonely.
really strong image of loneliness.
Lonely.
And when people say, "Oh, what kind of writer is George Saunders?" One thing we do is we put him in groups and clubs, and we just sort of foreground the qualities. We say, "What's this one like?" And sometimes this guy's like a Vonnegut or a Barthelme, likes the absurd. And sometimes you'll see someone say, "Oh, Hemingway." I think this ending of this story is very Hemingway-ish. Especially the early short stories like Up in Michigan, where just I'm in this story, I'm going to take something apart, a relationship, and I'm going to just show just the moment it just ended. And, you know, it's going to be the dying fall of that thing. So we have this man, and he dies in the hallway with the radio on. But it's not just the ending of the story, right?
Right. Yeah. The house is sold to a young couple who yanked out the poles and sticks and left them by the road on garbage day. Very sad.
What do you think about this as a symbolic action? Hey, George, what are you doing? What are you trying to tell me? Every writer is, you know, trying to make something that's interesting, fascinating, beautiful, call it what you will. And that's that aspect. But then there's also, with many writers, not all, but I would say many, push the world in a certain direction. We don't have to say politics, but or maybe maintain the world in a certain way, push or maintain, but the symbolic action of writing this story, right? I mean, sometimes you tell someone a story and it's not just about the story, you're sending a message with the story. What's George Saunders trying to tell us? Don't put sticks in your yard. Someone will just have to throw them away later. Okay, maybe not that.
Is it nothingness?
How would that work?
Well, here he was very active with his sticks and so on. And then he's gone and there's nothing there. It's, and the house is sold and there's no trace of anything. There's not an emotional trace left of I miss him type of thing with the family. It's just,
Yeah.
it's just nothing.
Back to the blinking, that for me seemed like a real transition. There was some sort of normalcy with the holiday celebrations, you know, and yes, the child was remembering the interaction with with the father, saying, you know, he was kind of strict and you know, don't wait. He didn't want them to waste ketchup and so on and so forth. But after the blinking, the sticks took on a different character. You know, now he's celebrating or he's acknowledging Groundhog's Day. And then when an earthquake struck Chile, he lay a pole on its side and sprayed a painted rift in the earth. And then in the next sentence, it talks about mom died and he dressed the pole as death. Well, I hadn't seen mom mentioned before this at all. So maybe there was a lot going on in his life that he was having difficulty dealing with. Maybe she was very ill and he's dealing with the complexity of that. And so it's causing him to see things differently and in a much bleaker way. He dressed the pole as death and hung from the crossbar photos of mom as a baby. And then he had odd talismans from his youth arranged around the base. You know, so it feels like he's sort of preparing to die himself. It's and before he leaves, he wants to try and reach out to the kids and establish some sort of connection with them. Yeah, and the only ways he knows how to do it is to have string going between these six sticks that he's put in the yard that I'm imagining represent the kids in the family. And he's got some little messages on them. And, you know, he's looking for love and forgiveness and then it's over and we don't, so don't.
Has the character Meredith, the father, has he made some sort of like a psychological, emotional, spiritual progress?
I think he's trying to, yeah.
I think you've kind of demonstrated that something happens there with that man.
Mhm.
And what happens to his family?
Understanding. Please for understanding is what it says. Apology, you know, seeking letters of apology.
You know,
frantically written on index cards.
Yeah.
There's an urgency.
He has, he has changed.
Definitely.
And if this were a Frank Capra movie, It's a Beautiful Life, then, surrounding, him on the final scene would be all the children laughing and understanding and maybe not even remembering to catch up, but it's not a Frank Capra movie. So you've got a interesting opposing tension in George Saunders' stories. There is a wish to tell the story of a pilgrim's progress, of journey to insight, but there's a kind of a countervailing skepticism, or maybe it's a worry that, well, they'll say that's sentimental, and that sort of skeptical hard edge is very strong in this story. Throwing the garbage out in the next garbage day, throwing the sticks out. These are the sticks that, he dressed up as death when mom died. This is somebody who's really reaching out through a weird ritual, a weird idiosyncratic ritual. So it gives us ways to think about religion, where we think about, there's things we do with other people in a certain way, but not everybody's on the same page. You could go through this whole journey and have, nobody really understand it. And he lived his life. Our narrator, our speaker, does that person enjoy spiritual, religious, emotional, psychological progress?
I think that he says that they found meanness within them. Shows that there
That's
was
a
some
beautiful
recognition.
That's a beautiful line. We before we settled into our own meanness, something like that.
See, we found
It-
the seeds of
meanness
meanness blooming
blooming.
also within us.
After he had children, after they had children,
Yeah.
not before.
Mhm.
I'm gonna give a point to Sharyn there, because that's really hidden Buddhist language. The
Yeah.
seeds. That's there's a lot of misunderstanding about what karma is, but basically you form bad habits, and these are seeds, and they're gonna sprout. When the rain comes, if you've been practicing anger and hatred and resentment or whatever, the next rain comes, those seeds are gonna sprout, next opportunity. And that's a little snippet of that in this story. It doesn't end like with, I mean, the man does, he's aware of what was wrong with what he did before, and he says, forgive. So if the family doesn't get it, what's the point of the story?
Well, I mean, what's the point of living? I mean, no one will remember you in 3 generations, and yet we continue to live, and we continue to have these traditions because there's just a spark in us. And so to answer the question you had earlier is, like, what do I see in this story is just the rolling over. It never ends. It's the holidays. You don't remember what you did last year for Christmas or for Halloween, but you do it again this year. And it happens every year. You forget. And did it matter? But it mattered that you did it. But does it matter if you remember what you wore for Halloween? And when the children became parents, they remembered, broad stroke ideas of the way that their father was and the meanness, but that's all they said. They aren't talking about any of the dishes that they served during these traditions that they now serve to their children. It's this rolling over of time, and then the house rolls over, and then someone else has it. And so it's just this deconstruction of the wheel of time. And I honestly, for me, I thought that it was very comforting because it's okay. Like, there's going to be memories, and not everyone is going to remember everything. And that's just the decomposing nature of life. And life will always beget life somewhere else.
Stephanie.
I'm thinking of the Dalai Lama And the purpose of life is happiness. And I'm also thinking of his book, The Book of Joy. And there is none of this in this story. No happiness, no joy. And in that sense, when I said nothingness, the meaningless, the lack of any kind of interaction of any joy, of just being joy and creating his stick things. There wasn't a feeling that that was joyous of any kind for this man. He was just them out and creating the crucifix and then putting things on it, but it wasn't a joy of, I've created this. You didn't sense any happiness in the creation.
The child says it was dad's only concession to glee.
But
And
it doesn't.
Chuck, I'm sorry, Meredith. Go ahead.
No, but to me, I know he says, the child
Yeah,
says it.
yeah.
Perceives it that way, but it doesn't
Mhm.
seem that the man actually experienced it, especially towards the end when he's desperately asking for forgiveness and love.
Maybe Chuck or John can say a little bit about, sometimes Buddhism is seen as pessimistic.
Mhm.
And I think you're picking that up.
In this,
So it might be if either of you can explain why it's not.
Would you like first go with that, Chuck, or you want me to go?
I want you to do it because I'm I'm being enlightened by the comments that people are making. Is this a sad story? Is this ultimately a sad story? This person trying to connect with family members through something that's quasi-religious? I don't know yet. But you're saying pessimism is a rap that was put on Buddhism, and it's not true because the Dalai Lama and others and Thich Nhat Hanh will tell you Buddhism is joyous
Right.
as a practice. But I'll let John.
No, I didn't say always. I said, I think, well, maybe I didn't say sometimes it's seen that way by people who don't quite understand what's happening with it. That it is positive in many ways.
There's a lot going on. There was a whole kind of debate in the 19th century, and Schopenhauer and so got in on it, and that Buddhism is intensely negative and pessimistic, and kind of reducing it to a nihilism. Everything is suffering. Dukkha is the first noble truth. Dukkha means sort of inherently unsatisfactory experience. A better way to say it is that unsatisfaction, pain exists. Rule number 2, because of craving. Because of craving, we suffer. And sometimes people talk about a pain-suffering distinction, right? Pain is like, if somebody steps on your foot and you have gout or whatever, it's gonna hurt. You're gonna make a face, even if you're the Dalai Lama. I wouldn't want to test it. Go step on the guy's foot. Not a Buddha. You didn't smile. Yeah, of course it's going to hurt. But when we talk about suffering or anguish, there's this kind of existential surplus of misery where the mind is sort of tainted by these expectations. So is Buddhism negative? The deep Buddhist philosophy, if you go through any of the Tibetan traditions, and I know Sharyn can back me up on this, is that there's a basic goodness, a basic ground of, and that means sort of at the level of the absolute. If we can let go of the things that make us cling to our particulars in life, our ego, or the things that make us stuck in all the various ways. If we can let go of those, when there's an earthquake, the ground doesn't cry. That can sound very silly and very philosophical about someone else's pain, but it's also the basis for the Buddhist psychology, this sort of ordinary mind or basic goodness, which doesn't mean trivial ordinary, but it means the fact of our awareness is ultimately blissful. And one could say about the story is that it gives us a picture of some miserable people, one man trying. But when I read it, I think that's a great story. And we can sometimes leave out what's going on in the black box when we think about, what would this mean if this was me or my neighbor or my father? I come from kind of family dysfunction, and I can barely help to put ornaments on the Christmas tree every year. I do symbolically put one or two up there. But for me, there are these memories of alcohol and shouting that kind of take the fun out of it for me. But I'll participate in the rituals and I'll put on the star on the top or whatever. Maybe that's why I like this story so much. But you have this account from somebody who doesn't really understand what's going on, of a process, a gesture, and a man. And in the situation, in the story, in the black box, the man, we said, he's undergone some changes, lost on his children in the story, lost on the new neighbors. Sometimes when I'm going to go do something bad, I say, no one's looking. But that's not really true because I'm looking. And when we read this story and we see, oh, the family doesn't care, he died in the hallway with the radio on, this person became more present to his life, and we become more present to his life when we read this story. If we feel something, if we think that's sad, then we are encountering rather than failing to encounter. And that's what happens with those sticks, right? The man dies and he dresses it up as death and puts, the earthquake, he puts the stick on the side. He's, through his rituals, they're not empty rituals. It's lost on a lot of people. A writer who writes about religion in a secular society can be in a funny situation. Do you guys all know Mary Carr? She wrote a book called The Liars Club, and it's one of 3 memoirs. The Liars Club is about her crazy dad and his friends, and her parents got married and divorced 8 times to each other. And every time a tornado came into town, her mother went kind of bipolar and crazy. And, it's all very hardscrabble Texas, funny language. She's a colleague of Saunders at Syracuse, Mary Carr. Her 3rd memoir is called Lit, L-I-T, Lit. And Lit is about how she became a writer, literature, but it's also about her alcoholism, Lit. And it's also about her becoming a really serious Christian. So she goes on national public radio and they, ask her, well, do you believe the thing about Jesus and the bread and the wine? And she just says, I believe it all. I believe in the Easter bunny, and she said, talking about religion to people who have no interest is like doing card tricks on the radio. So there's this, I think, maybe a frustration about talking about the spiritual path. That's, this story could be kind of an allegory for that. This person goes through and follows a path and gets somewhere, and it's lost on his family and people around him. Other writers who write about religion have talked about these. I don't know, Chuck, Sharyn, what do you guys think? You writers, you ever feel like, okay, I'm talking about Maxine Hung Kingston, when she, remember, Chuck, at the American Literature Association in 2004, when you and Maxine both read for free and didn't make me talk to your agents because we had no budget. What beautiful people. That's a happy story. Thank you. That's what I mean. Thank you. You and Maxine read. Now, when Maxine read, she started to do this Thich Nhat Hanh Buddhist peace bell thing with a, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to go like a lead balloon. These English professors, I was just like, oh no, it's not going to work. Oh no, Maxine, no. Talk about your Asian American heritage, please. And I was wrong. She had everybody eating out of the palm of her hand. She had everybody like, yeah, we're hearing the bell at the same time. We're 400 people in this room, and we're not a bunch of academics in a panel looking at our phones. she did the artistic miracle thing.
Well, John,
And
that room was packed. It was
it was
packed,
packed.
which was rare for an academic, session. And I think there is a hunger for, well, I won't say religion, but meaning and spirituality. We can talk about this ourselves later, but I don't see a lot of it in modernist literature. And I think the hunger is there. And you talk about Mad Maxine on Kingston. You have referred to her as being a bodhisattva because we didn't charge you any money to do that event. Yeah, I remember that event very, very well, and thank you for it. It was memorable. Yeah.
Oh, it was fun, you guys. We did an interview where I'm sort of on the inclusive side. I sometimes don't know when to not include people and put funny people together. But I invited all my friends to participate in this group interview with Chuck and Maxine. And it was just a lot of fun, like, oh, don't you hate it when reviewers, oh yeah, they always do that. This is published somewhere, you can find it. But how they, I don't know, I think what you guys were, it's something that Maxine has written about, and I think you've written about, when you get picked up, like, we all have multiple handles, but it's got to be race. And that's kind of the story with Maxine, is because she's Asian American, nobody notices the Buddhist part. It's sort of the Asian ascent of the Asian American woman story is all that the meter is going to pick up. They don't notice.
Do you think it's the responsibility in some ways of the author to say that's not all I'm writing about, or that's not all I am?
That's
No matter
absolutely what these authors I'm writing about do.
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, but as in the story sticks, you can go through your path and you might be understood, or you might be understood posthumously, or you might never be understood. So, that part where you do your thing and hope for the best, there has to be a kind of a separation, or maybe in Buddhist terms, there will be less suffering if you're not attached to the outcome, and maybe you're more free to follow what you think is the truth.
John,
The
something
fullest.
I want to ask you, not today, what you think of, if you've seen American fiction.
I haven't gotten it here in the theaters yet, but I'm going to love it.
Okay.
Aren't I? I did not meet.
Let's not talk about that, because Chuck
Okay.
will go on about that. So you could do that some other time. I see we're getting toward 12. Is there anything else you want to say, John, about Saunders, Buddhism, your own work?
I wanted to tell you a little bit about Lincoln and the Bardo. That the first 10 pages are kind of bewildering, but it's this amazing novel, and it's not just about 1863. The Lincoln who goes into the Bardo is Willie Lincoln, the young son who dies of typhus. And we did a performance at the American Literature Association, a reading that George kindly gave us the script for. He said, yeah, full speed ahead, go on. Maxine on Kingston played Willie Lincoln. I played the Baron, Eddie Barron, the foul-mouthed Eddie Barron. Dropped a bunch of F-bombs in front of my professor colleagues. And then we had the three major characters who are sort of dealing with this in-betweenness. For Abraham Lincoln, the in-betweenness is the Civil War is just becoming the Civil War we think it is now. The one where 700,000 people died. Before that, it was kind of like in the early days of World War I. It's going to go on like this. It'll be over in a few weeks. No, it won't. This was the first modern war. And that is definitely something that Saunders writes about in the story. So Lincoln is at a point of crisis. What the hell do I do? He's visiting the graveyard. And this is a case where there is a kind of you might say, you know, a spiritual action or a path or a practice. He's visiting the body of the dead. So just as we get what in the diegesis, inside the story, it's maybe a failed path. The father does not achieve communication with the family, but maybe with the reader, communication and understanding is reached. But in the story Lincoln in the Bardo, it's a very interesting process, and it parallels the whole MAGA thing going on in this country. Saunders followed around Trump and looked not so much at Trump as at the followers. Why do some of these folks go to these rallies, and what do they get out of it? And, you know, he's the Buddhist guy, you know, compassion, compassion, compassion. Let's always be nice. You're not supposed to say, gee, these people are awful. Let's drive them into the sea. I'm a Buddhist, but I say that about twice a day. Sorry if I've offended anyone with politics, but I have my strong views and you are allowed your strong views. Anyway, it's a subtext to this bigger story. So when we read these short stories, we're kind of seeing the sketches for what might become the big painting. Some years ago, and I mean like 40 years ago, there was a Picasso exhibit in New York that I went to, and it was just, you know, I didn't know Guernica is the size of my wall over there. I didn't know it was that big. You don't get that looking at it in a book. And then they had all the sketches that Picasso did, like you know, it's maybe a conical shape, but that's what he's doing to make the tongue of the horse, to show the horse that's been hit by a bomb. And you see how these parts, you know, how a writer practices, you know, maybe an angle of approach or a thought, and then it can mean something else, used the same way or a different way in a larger work. So we start to see the ecology of a work. If I can just throw that in about Lincoln and the Bardo. I know that wasn't on your reading list today. Are there any other puzzles from sticks that, you know, anything sticks in your mind about sticks? See what I did there?
Tamarah, you said you had much to bring up. Do you have
I did.
anything else?
You know, the one thing that I took away from this more than anything was just when we talk about fiction and we use terms like theme and plot, and when you're writing, well, at least when I'm writing, I'll just say for myself, is I just want to not be wrong. And that's such a problem with writing, is I just want this to be the story. And so I'm looking for all of those things that I need to include, like a theme and a plot and character development and a narrative arc. And I'm like, I have all these, and I can have more graphs than I have of a story. And so when I read this, it's such a relief um, that the structure is just the organization of allowing the story to ask a question, or it wasn't even asking, it's allowing the story to answer a question that the audience might be answering. And also it encourages the audience to participate. And I think that with this one, there's so many different ways of coming to it. Naturally, it's like my uh, religion is not Buddhist. And so now I'm looking at this, I'm like, I missed everything. And now I have to read it again. But aren't those the best stories that make you wrestle with yourself and wrestle with the author? And if you're not wrestling with the language, then you know, what are you even doing? So that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, like, how did he write this in a way that he did not want to please the critic? And he wrote the story from a very pure perspective, I think. So
Well,
What do you
when
mean by please?
when I when I wrote to him, he said he didn't know what it was about at first because he had just written it during a break at work. So it just came out. Now, I'm not saying that that was the final. I didn't ask him about his revisions or anything like that, but it seemed to be more of a spontaneous kind of story. And John, I think that's how he writes, doesn't he? He doesn't have necessarily a plan. He might have a question, like what he might want to answer in the story, but he doesn't seem to have a plan. And that's why it seems to be so creative, innovative, all this business, because he's just writing the story straight with an idea. I'm not saying without an idea. Okay, he's got an idea of what it's going to be, but
but he has to
yeah,
allow the
the
freedom
writing
to it.
itself is more impulse.
Yeah, you know, I write, I don't know, 2 to 3 poems a day, and some of them are just ditties. And I have a rule, like, you know, do not criticize this stuff when it just comes out. They're like little kids. They're allowed their childhood. A week later, I can say, well, that one's, you know, it just goes in the pot. But there has to be, I mean, for me, a relaxation of the critical sense and the planning and the controlling, or else the voice isn't, you know, I'm not really free to say what I want on the page. Later on, if one is going to send something to someone else, you have to try to comb out the typos or maybe arrange things in a better order or do what you do. And I'm sure he does that. But I think you said,
Yeah.
Sharyn, that he wrote this in a blast on a lunch break.
Right.
You know,
That's what he told me.
yeah, which is it's kind of cool. I mean, and it's intense, you know, it just sort of came to him. It's sort of got the structure of a joke in a way, right? You know,
Yeah.
just kind of coming down to until the sticks just get thrown away at the end. So on the one hand, it has that sort of negativity, but the focus and the brilliance of it and the movement through all the holidays, the way in which this utterly idiosyncratic situation in some ways connects with, I don't know, nationally. Those aren't just anybody's holidays, right? Groundhog Day is not a universal holiday. Thanksgiving, I think they do it in Canada, but they do it on a different day. You know, those are American holidays. So he's, you know, he's kind of dealing with a we there, who we are, we, the readers, are. I teach the story in Singapore, so maybe I have to explain 1 or 2 holidays. But yeah.
I think we should also mention his sense of humor, because we've been talking a lot about other aspects of his writing, but he does have a sense of humor.
If you get the audio book of Lincoln in the Bardo, everybody wanted to be part of that. There's like 100 different actors, and one of them is David Sedaris, who is, I think, friends with Saunders. I think they're all right. They're both really good readers, and Sedaris is especially good at putting the fun in dysfunction. So we, you know, if we're encountering, I mean, this is just a pretty basic problem with art that we'd like to talk about over and over again. But if you're talking about something really bad, you better find a way to make it pleasurable. And sometimes that's scandalous, right? I mean, what about, you know, somebody wants to make a movie about the Holocaust or something like that. If you don't make it into something that somebody wants to sit and watch, then someone will not sit and watch. So there's a doubleness to this so-called negative representation, right? On the one hand, this is a sort of dysfunctional family. They didn't communicate very well. Dad died, and, you know, I sort of thinking, how long was he sitting there with the radio playing? You know, it just makes him seem deader than dead that the radio's playing while he can't hear it, you know? That detail is insightful. So I'm looking at the awful thing and I'm enjoying the insight. And I think that's a great trick if you can do it. Or can
Wow,
just talk
thank
about,
you. You have really enriched our discussion today. Thank you. It's
Thank
been
you.
great.
been my pleasure.
Thank you for
I'm so
getting up so early
Yes.
I'm
and
getting
for
up and now I'm
being
going
here.
back. In a few more hours before the date time.
Yeah, before the
It's
day.
been wonderful to meet you all. Stephanie, Ava, Tamarah, Meredith, Robert. So good to meet you. It's been a real pleasure. This isn't something I get to do every day. And I'm just so happy that Sharyn thought of me for this. So thank you very much. See you, Chuck.
Thank
And,
you.
and hello
Bye.
to Mary. I'm sorry,
Oh,
hello to Helena.
okay. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
we should have John come back to talk to us.
Yes.
Come to
Okay.
Seattle. You got really good coffee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you probably need it now, right?
When was I last time I went to Fire? Fire, is that how you say it? It was your daughter's arts cafe?
Oh, Fair
Oh,
Gallery
it was
Cafe.
fair.
Fair Gallery Cafe. That's been gone for a long time.
Years.
Well, that's the last time I was in Seattle when we met up there.
Yeah.
Oops,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
saw
yeah.
you in Boston and Chicago.
Saw you in Boston.
Mhm.
Well,
Okay.
all right, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you so
wonderful
much.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.